Abandoned by her family on a toxic planet, an alien woman's only hope was a human and his biomask. The atmosphere burned with every breath. Nera stumbled across the barren landscape, her iridescent skin dulled by the toxic air. The planet's surface stretched endlessly before her, a wasteland of sharp rocks and poisonous winds. Each step sent waves of pain through her weakening body, but she forced herself to continue. This was her punishment, for daring to be different, for refusing to embrace the warrior culture that had defined her people for millennia. The stellar ascendancy had no room for those who questioned their ways. Weakness cannot be tolerated, her father's words echoed in her mind. His face had been stone as he pronounced her sentence. Even her siblings had turned away, unwilling to speak against the council's decision. Nera's legs finally gave out, and she collapsed against a jagged rock formation. The toxic atmosphere was slowly killing her, just as they had intended. A fitting end for one deemed unworthy of their perfect society. Her people prided themselves on their enhanced biology, carefully cultivated over generations. They were meant to be the apex of evolution, stronger, faster, more resilient than any other species. But Nera had been born different. Her body rejected the genetic modifications they tried to force on her. She couldn't handle the combat stimulants they used in training. Even her mind rebelled against their doctrine of superiority and conquest. The wind howled around her, carrying stinging particles that made her eyes water. How long had she been here? Days? Weeks? Time had lost all meaning in this desolate place. Her throat burned with every breath, lungs struggling to process the poisoned air. In the distance, something caught her attention. A glint of metal against the purple-tinged sky. At first she thought it was a hallucination, her oxygen-starved brain conjuring false hope. But the shape grew larger, more defined. A ship, its design unlike anything in the Ascendancy's fleet. Nera tried to stand, but her muscles refused to cooperate. Darkness crept at the edges of her vision. The ship was closer now, close enough that she could hear the low hum of its engines. A figure emerged from the vessel, protected by an environmental suit. Her last conscious thought was that at least she wouldn't die alone on this forsaken rock. Then everything faded to black. When awareness returned, it came in fragments. The soft hiss of filtered air. The gentle vibration of ship engines. A voice, speaking words she couldn't quite grasp. Nera forced her eyes open, squinting against what seemed like blindingly bright light after so long in the planet's perpetual gloom. "Easy there," the voice said, clearer now. "You're safe." She turned her head toward the sound and found herself looking at a human male. He sat nearby, watching her with genuine concern in his dark eyes. A breathing mask covered the lower half of his face, protection against any lingering toxins she might exhale. "I'm Riker," he continued when she didn't speak. "Found you on that hellhole of a planet. Nearly didn't spot you in time." Nera tried to speak, but her throat was too raw. Riker seemed to understand. He reached for something out of her view and returned with a container of water. "Small sips," he advised, helping her drink. "Your system's been through a lot." The water was cool and clean, soothing her burning throat. When she could finally form words, she asked the question that burned in her mind. "Why?" Riker's eyes crinkled at the corners, suggesting a smile behind his mask. "Why save you?" "Because you needed saving. That's reason enough." Such a simple answer, yet it shook the foundations of everything she'd been taught. Her people would never waste resources saving a stranger, especially one deemed unworthy of life. But this human had done exactly that, asking nothing in return. "They'll come for me," she warned him, her voice still rough. "The Ascendancy doesn't leave loose ends." Riker shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. "Let them try. I've gotten pretty good at staying off the radar of folks who mean harm." Nera studied him, trying to understand. He was nothing like the stories she'd been told about humans, supposedly primitive, weak creatures who would soon fall to the Ascendancy's might. Instead, she saw strength in his steady gaze, and something her own people had forgotten: compassion. "Rest," he said, standing. "We've got a long journey ahead if you want to stay free. But first you need to heal." As he turned to leave, Nera called out, "Thank you." The words felt foreign on her tongue. Gratitude wasn't encouraged in the Ascendancy. Riker paused at the doorway. "You can thank me by proving them wrong. Show them that being different isn't the same as being weak." For the first time since her exile began, Nera felt something other than despair. Perhaps there was a future for her after all, one she would choose for herself. The ship's corridors hummed with quiet energy as Nera made her way to the bridge. 2 weeks had passed since her rescue, and her strength was finally returning. Her body had begun adapting to the filtered air, though she still needed the specialized mask Riker had given her. The device was a marvel of human ingenuity. Lightweight, efficient, and far more comfortable than anything the Ascendancy had developed. She found Riker at the controls, his fingers dancing across the console with practiced ease. He looked up as she entered, his usual half-smile appearing. "You're looking better." "I feel better," she admitted, settling into the co-pilot's seat. She'd spent enough time watching him work to understand the basics of human ship operations. "Though I still don't understand why you're taking such risks for me." Riker's expression turned thoughtful. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be cast out for being different." He adjusted their course slightly before continuing. "Back on Earth, I never quite fit in. Too restless. Too curious about what was beyond our atmosphere. When the chance came to join the deep space explorers, I took it. Never looked back." Nera studied his profile, noting the subtle tension in his jaw. There was more to his story, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Where are we headed?" "Trading outpost called Havens Point. Need to resupply, and..." He hesitated. "There's someone there who might be able to help with your condition. Make it so you don't need the mask anymore." The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "Is that possible?" "There's this doctor, bit unconventional, but brilliant. Specializes in xenobiology. If anyone can help your system adapt permanently, it's her." Before Nera could respond, warning lights flashed across the console. Riker's expression hardened as he checked the readings. "We've got company. Look like Ascendancy scouts." Nera's heart raced. "They found us." "Not for long." Riker's hands moved swiftly over the controls. The ship banked sharply, diving toward a nearby asteroid field. "Hold on tight." What followed was unlike anything Nera had experienced. Riker guided the ship through the asteroid field with impossible precision, using the massive rocks for cover. The pursuing vessels were larger, faster, but couldn't match his maneuverability. "You've done this before," she observed, gripping her seat as they narrowly avoided collision with a spinning asteroid. Riker grinned. "Let's just say I've had practice avoiding unwanted attention." He pulled the ship into a tight spiral, using the momentum to slingshot around a particularly large asteroid. The maneuver put them directly behind one of the pursuit vessels. Without hesitation, Riker fired a precise burst from the ship's modest weapons. The shot struck the scout ship's engines, sending it spinning off course. The second pursuer broke off, presumably to assist their damaged companion. "They'll be back," Nera said softly. "Probably. But we'll be long gone by then." Riker set a new course, taking them deeper into uncharted space. "You okay?" Nera realized she was trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from something else. Exhilaration. She'd never experienced anything like this. The Ascendancy's military precision and overwhelming force was one thing, but this was art. "That was incredible," she admitted. Riker's expression softened. "You should have seen your face. For someone raised by a militant society, you sure seemed to enjoy our little dance through the asteroids." Maybe because it wasn't about dominance or destruction. It was, she searched for the right word, beautiful. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Nera felt her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with their recent escape. Riker cleared his throat and turned back to the controls, but not before she caught the flush creeping up his neck. "We should reach Havens Point in about 12 hours, he said, his voice slightly rough. "Try to get some rest. Something tells me we're going to need it." Nera nodded and stood, but paused at the doorway. "Riker." He looked up. "Thank you. Not just for saving me, but for showing me there's more than one way to be strong." His smile was gentle. "Get some sleep, Starlight. Tomorrow's a new adventure." As she made her way back to her quarters, Nera realized something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just running from her past. She was running toward something. Something that felt remarkably like hope. Havens Point lived up to its name, at least in appearance. The space station was a sprawling collection of interconnected modules, its exterior adorned with lights that made it look like a constellation come to life. But Nera knew better than to trust appearances. Her people had taught her that much, if nothing else. "Stay close," Riker murmured as they made their way through the crowded marketplace. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back, guiding her through the press of bodies. The touch sent warmth spreading through her despite the station's cool, recycled air. They passed stalls selling everything from exotic fruits to questionably acquired technology. Merchants called out in dozens of languages, their voices mixing with the general hum of commerce and survival. Nera noticed how Riker's eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any sign of trouble. "Your doctor friend," she asked quietly. "Can we trust her?" "Dr. Patel. With your health, absolutely. With anything else?" He shrugged. "Let's just say she has her own agenda, but she's the best at what she does." They turned down a quieter corridor, the noise of the market fading behind them. The medical section of the station was cleaner, more orderly, though still far from the sterile perfection of ascendancy facilities. Riker stopped at an unmarked door and pressed his palm to the scanner. The door slid open to reveal a woman with silver-streaked black hair and sharp eyes. She looked Nera up and down with clinical interest. "So this is your mystery patient." Her accent was different from Riker's, her words precisely measured. "Nera, meet Dr. Patel." "Doc, this is Nera." The doctor gestured them inside. Her clinic was a curious mix of cutting-edge technology and what appeared to be salvaged equipment. "Riker told me about your situation. Fascinating, really. The Ascendancy's genetic programs are legendary, but their treatment of those who don't conform." She shook her head. "Barbaric. Can you help her?" Riker asked, his voice tight with concern. "Of course I can, but it won't be quick, and it won't be pleasant." Dr. Patel turned to Nera. "Your body is fighting itself. The genetic modifications they attempted, even the ones that failed, left markers in your system. That's why you're having trouble processing normal atmospheres. We need to reset your biology, in a sense." Nera swallowed hard. "How long?" "The treatment itself will take about 3 days. Recovery, another week." The doctor's expression softened slightly. "But when it's done, you'll be free. No more mask, no more dependency on filtered air." "And the cost?" Riker asked. Dr. Patel smiled. "Let's just say you'll owe me a favor. Nothing too dramatic, just information, when I need it." Nera felt Riker tense beside her. "What kind of information?" "The kind that keeps people like us alive." The doctor's eyes hardened. "The Ascendancy is expanding, more aggressive than ever. Those of us on the fringes need to be prepared." Before either of them could respond, an alarm blared through the station. Red emergency lights began flashing in the corridor outside. Dr. Patel moved swiftly to her console, checking the security feeds. "Multiple ships just dropped out of hyperspace," she reported grimly. "Ascendancy signatures." Riker cursed. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Because I'm still connected to them," Nera realized, horror dawning. "The genetic markers, they must be using them to track me." Dr. Patel nodded. "It's possible. Their biotechnology is more advanced than most realize." "Then we have to leave," Riker said, reaching for Nera's hand. But she pulled away. "No." The word surprised even her. "If we run, they'll just keep following. We need to break their connection to me." She turned to Dr. Patel. "How quickly can you start the treatment?" The doctor's eyes lit with something like approval. "Right now. But once we begin, we can't stop. And if they breach the station before it's complete, they won't." Riker's voice was steel. "I'll make sure of it." He stepped closer to Nera, his expression intense. "Are you sure about this?" She reached up, touching his face gently. The gesture felt natural, necessary. "I'm tired of running. Tired of letting them control me. Whatever happens, I want to face it on my terms." For a moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken words. Then Riker leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll buy you as much time as I can. Just come back to me, Starlight." "Always," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As Dr. Patel led her to the treatment chamber, Nera heard Riker making calls, calling in favors, organizing a defense. She should have felt afraid, knowing the Ascendancy's forces were coming. Instead, she felt something else, a fierce determination. They had taken everything from her once. She wouldn't let them do it again. Not when she finally had something worth fighting for. Pain coursed through Nera's body as Dr. Patel's treatment worked to undo years of genetic manipulation. Through the haze of agony, she could hear distant explosions, the station's structure groaning under assault. Somewhere above, Riker was fighting to buy her time. "Stay with me," Dr. Patel's voice cut through the fog. "Your body is adapting faster than expected. Fighting back. Good." Nera gritted her teeth as another wave of fire swept through her veins. The treatment chamber hummed with energy, bathing her in light that seemed to penetrate to her very DNA. She had never felt more vulnerable or more determined. Through the chamber's transparent walls, she saw Dr. Patel working furiously at her controls, making constant adjustments. The woman's face was tight with concentration, her fingers flying over holographic displays. More explosions, closer now. The station's AI announced breach warnings in multiple sectors. Nera tried to focus on her breathing, on staying conscious through the pain. She wouldn't let Riker's sacrifice be in vain. "Doctor," she managed between gasps. "How much longer?" "Another hour, minimum. Your genetic structure is remarkably complex. Breaking down the ascendancy's modifications without damaging your natural systems is..." She trailed off as another explosion rocked the station. The clinic's door burst open. Riker stumbled in, his face streaked with blood and soot. "They've breached the upper levels. Station security is overwhelmed." Dr. Patel didn't look up from her work. "We're not done. We don't have a choice. They're coming." He moved toward the treatment chamber, but the doctor blocked his path. "If we stop now, the genetic reset will fail. She'll be worse than before. Maybe dead." Her voice was steel. "Give me 15 minutes." Riker's jaw clenched. He checked his weapons, then the doorway. "You've got 10. Then we're gone, finished or not." Inside the chamber, Nera fought to stay conscious. The pain was evolving, changing from sharp agony to a deep cellular ache. She could feel her body transforming, breaking down and rebuilding itself. Through the haze, she heard familiar voices in the corridor, the precise, cultured tones of Ascendancy officers. Her people had arrived. "Hold position," someone ordered. "The target is inside." Riker took up position by the door, weapons ready. Dr. Patel worked faster, her movements almost frenzied. "Almost there," she muttered. "Just a few more minutes." The first attacker came through the door in a blur of motion. Riker's shot caught them in the chest, sending them sprawling. More followed. The clinic erupted in weapons fire and shouts. Nera watched helplessly as Riker fought. He moved with lethal grace, each shot precise, each movement calculated. But there were too many. A blast caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stayed standing, firing back. "Done," Dr. Patel shouted, slamming a final command into her console. The chamber's light intensified, becoming almost unbearable. Nera screamed as something fundamental shifted inside her. It felt like her entire being was being torn apart and reassembled. When the light faded, she found she could breathe freely. The mask lay forgotten on the chamber floor. The door burst open again. Through the smoke and chaos stepped a figure Nera had hoped never to see again. Commander Varix, her father's most trusted enforcer. "Disappointing," he said, surveying the scene. "All this trouble for a defective specimen." His cold eyes found Nera. "Your father sends his regards. And his judgment." He raised his weapon. Riker, despite his wounds, launched himself forward. The two collided in a brutal display of close combat. Varix was augmented, enhanced by the best technology the Ascendancy could provide. But Riker fought with desperate intensity, fueled by something stronger than mechanical enhancement. Nera pushed herself up, legs shaking. Her body felt different. Lighter, stronger, more truly her own than ever before. She saw Dr. Patel slip away through a hidden panel in the wall, but her attention was fixed on the fight before her. Varix slammed Riker against a wall, enhanced fingers closing around his throat. "Humans," he sneered, "so fragile." "We're stronger than you think." Riker gasped, and drove a hidden blade deep into Varix's side, finding a gap in his augmented armor. The commander staggered back, black blood seeping between his fingers. His eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed with rage. He reached for his dropped weapon. Nera moved without thinking. Her body, newly remade, responded with perfect clarity. She grabbed a fallen attacker's weapon and fired. The shot caught Varric squarely in the chest. He looked at her with something like surprise before collapsing. The remaining Ascendancy soldiers hesitated, seeing their commander fall. Nera stood tall, weapon steady. "Leave," she commanded in their language. "Tell my father his judgment means nothing to me anymore." Whether it was her words or the steel in her voice, they retreated, dragging their wounded with them. As soon as they were gone, Nera rushed to Riker's side. He was breathing heavily, clutching his injured shoulder. That, he coughed, was incredibly hot. Despite everything, she laughed. Then, because she could, because she was finally free to act on her own desires, she kissed him. His lips were warm, tasting of blood and smoke and possibility. When they parted, his eyes were bright with something more than pain. "We should probably get out of here," he murmured against her lips. "Probably," she agreed, helping him stand. "Any idea where we're going?" He grinned, that familiar roguish expression that had first caught her attention. "Anywhere you want, Starlight. The universe is wide open." 3 months after the battle at Haven's Point, Nera stood at the viewport of Riker's ship. Their ship now, watching stars streak past. Her reflection showed what she'd become, still uniquely herself, but stronger, more confident. The treatment had done more than free her from physical constraints. It had helped her discover who she truly was. "Credit for your thoughts." Riker's arms slipped around her waist from behind, pulling her against his chest. She leaned into him, savoring the warmth of his touch. "Just thinking about how much has changed," she said, turning in his embrace. The wound from Haven's Point had healed well, leaving only a slight scar on his shoulder. She traced it gently with her fingers, having second thoughts. His tone was light, but she caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Never." She kissed him softly, still marveling at how natural it felt. "You gave me more than freedom, Riker. You showed me I could be strong without being cruel, different without being wrong." His hands tightened on her waist. "You did that yourself. I just provided transportation and my roguish charm." She laughed, then sobered. "The latest reports say the Ascendancy is expanding their genetic program. More worlds are falling under their control. That's why we're meeting with Dr. Patel's network." Riker's expression grew serious. "Your information about their methods, combined with what the doctor learned from treating you, we might be able to help others like you." The thought filled Nera with purpose. She had spent so long believing she was alone in her difference, but Dr. Patel's research had proved otherwise. There were others within the Ascendancy who didn't fit their rigid mold, who struggled against their genetic destiny. "My father once told me that imperfection was a weakness," she said, moving back to the viewport. "But look at this." She gestured to the stars streaming past. "The universe itself is beautifully imperfect. That's what makes it worth exploring." Riker came up beside her, taking her hand. "Speaking of exploring," he pulled up a star chart on the nearby console. "I got word about a remote colony on the edge of Ascendancy space. Rumors say they're sheltering refugees, people who escaped the genetic programs. They could use our help." "It'll be dangerous," Nera noted, studying the coordinates. "That close to Ascendancy territory. When has that ever stopped us?" His grin was infectious. "Besides, I've made some modifications to the ship's stealth systems, and you've gotten pretty good with those defensive maneuvers I taught you." She raised an eyebrow. "Pretty good. I seem to recall outmaneuvering you in our last training run. I was distracted by your beauty." "Liar." But she smiled, pulling him down for another kiss. When they parted, she said, "Set the course. Those people need to know they're not alone." As Riker input the coordinates, Nera reflected on her journey. She had gone from an outcast, dying alone on a toxic planet, to someone who could make a real difference. The Ascendancy had tried to break her, to force her into their mold of perfection. Instead, they had set her free. A warning light flashed on the console, long-range sensors detecting Ascendancy patrols in their planned flight path. Riker looked at her questioningly. Nera smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of adventure rising in her chest. "Take us in. The hard way is usually more fun anyway." "That's my girl," he laughed, engaging the stealth systems. As their ship slipped between the stars, Nera felt complete in a way she never had within the Ascendancy. She had found her purpose, her strength, and most surprisingly, love. Not the cold, conditional acceptance her family had offered, but something real and warm and wonderfully imperfect. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned that true strength came not from genetic perfection or military might, but from the courage to be oneself. And as she stood beside Riker, plotting their course through the star-filled void, she knew she wouldn't have it any other way. They were outlaws, rebels, helpers of the forgotten. And they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together, they would write their own destiny among the stars, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of compassion. The ship accelerated, carrying them toward their next mission. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and endless possibility. Nera squeezed Riker's hand, smiling as he pulled her closer. "Ready for another adventure, Starlight?" he asked. "With you?" She looked up at him, seeing her future in his eyes. "Always."